No. Apparently there's a timer here. Alright, go.
Thank you, Justice, and please the court. My name is Vinay, and I, along with my co-counsel, Paige Morrison, do represent the respondent in this case, Calvert Baptist Church. In my time before the court, I will be showing that Mr. Kirtland was not a member of the captive audience at his funeral, and therefore he deserves no compensation for an intentional invasion of privacy. The Supreme Court has recognized that in public debate, citizens must tolerate insulting and even outrageous speech to provide adequate breathing space to freedoms protected by the First Amendment. And our co-counsel already established that this was a matter of public concern. So to start with the argument, according to Frisbee v. Schultz, the person who is part of a captive audience must be figuratively and perhaps literally trapped. So they essentially must literally be captive. In this case, Kirtland was not at all captive. He could have simply turned his head to avoid the speech. He received prior notice, which was actually published publicly, so there was no reason for him to assert that he's captive when in all senses, both literal and figurative.
I was wondering. Go ahead.
Did he receive the notice, or was it sent? Was it written on the paper?
The notice was published. It was announced publicly. However, it wasn't sent directly towards him, but the police were notified, and it was public. So anyone attending the funeral could have potentially known, or anyone not attending it really anywhere in the world could have known. So Kirtland necessarily cannot assert that he didn't have any means of knowing that they would be there beforehand. Furthermore, the protesters were 1,000 feet away from the private event of the church. In cases such as Hill v. Colorado, where the captive audience was actually upheld, the maximum distance the court has allowed has been around 100 feet, or 108 if you count for the extra 8 feet of distance for the person.
So if the church was 100 feet away, you believe that that would be illegal?
It would be a different case. The court would still have the matter of whether or not a funeral should be as protected a place as a hospital. And also it's important to note that a hospital is a completely private ground, while the funeral is not private until you actually step onto the steps of the church. Any part of the road that, as established in Frisbee v. Schultz, all roads, regardless of whether or not they're residential or leading to a church or whatever, are public fora and therefore can be used to voice any sort of public.
But isn't it true that they were along the one and only road leading to the church, so how could he not be captive if there was no other way to get there?
In a literal sense, again, there's no other way to get there, but that doesn't mean there's no other way to avoid the speech. Simply by turning your head, looking down, because there was prior notice published, and therefore...
But are we sure that he received the notice that they would be protesting his son's funeral?
We're not sure that he received it, but we're also not sure that he did receive it. That's not established in the facts of the case.
I want to clarify. It wasn't just simply a matter of turning your head. It would have had to been like a prolonged effort in order to not look at them, because they were following his car as he was driving along to the hospital. Not hospital, funeral.
Sure, so the captive audience doctrine does require a substantial invasion of privacy, and the facts have established that as the cars passed, Kirtland could have at most seen the signs for a couple seconds. There's no substantial invasion of privacy in a couple seconds. No way can someone have their privacy interests significantly demolished in a couple
Well, I think if someone has a privacy violated for even 2 seconds, that's still a violation of privacy.
The captive audience does require, quote-unquote, a substantial invasion of privacy, and this was not in any way an invasion of privacy, but if the court somehow rules that it is, it was not substantial in any means. To continue with our argument, Kirtland, we'll actually concede, did have a reasonable right to privacy at the funeral. There's no argument there. He was at his son's funeral. He has a reasonable right to privacy. However, along the road going towards the funeral, he did not necessarily deserve no privacy, but he had no reasonable right to privacy. Anyone going on any sort of road, which again has been declared public ground under Frisbee v. Schultz, doesn't have that right to privacy because they are on the public ground. In cases such as Frisbee v. Schultz, where picketing was prohibited on roads, that's very different because the people were actually on private grounds inside of the residential areas of their home. However, in this case, Kirtland was on the public ground as well as the protesters, and therefore there's no substantial privacy interest until Kirtland's on some sort of a private event or private ground, being the church. So when his privacy was quote-unquote invaded, he did not have the privacy interest, the substantial privacy interest present enough such that he could claim any sort of.
If a normal citizen's driving by a protest, would that normal average citizen look at the protest or not look at the protest? What
Please
would you
respond
say?
briefly.
Sure, they would look at it depending on how disruptive it is.
And please conclude your statement.
Okay, for the reasons I've stated above, we do not believe Kirtland was a captive audience, and therefore we would like this court to uphold the ruling of the lower court. Thank you.
Thanks.
Real quick, based on the facts of the case, they only told the authorities that they were gonna be there, they didn't tell anyone else.
They didn't make a public notice?
No, that
Court,
was-
Halbard had notified the authorities in advance.
Yeah, it said Chestnut issued a release announcing that Halberd members intended to picket Roger Kirtland.
Yeah, I thought they announced
Yeah,
it.
and then it says a news release.
18-1.
A news release, right?
And then it says Halberd notified the authorities in advance of its intent to picket the funeral, and the protesters complied with a police request that they stand at least 1,000 away from the entrance to St. John's.
I was reading the next paragraph.
For
I didn't see
recording.
that one.